Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Elisa Diana Huerta. I use they, them, pronouns, and I am a co-chair for the Becoming Anti-Racist Campus Steering Committee. I have the great honor of welcoming you this morning. And I think on behalf of the Becoming Anti-Racist Steering Committee, you'll hear us use the abbreviation BAAC. I think some people are calling it BAC, but that, we all to each their own. We're really happy to have you at this virtual symposium. So we'll begin by offering a land acknowledgement. So I believe that's going to come up onto the screen in a moment, so folks can follow along. Can folks? I'm not sure if I'm not seeing it, but if are other folks? It's okay. We'll take our time. It's Wednesday morning. It's the middle of the semester. It's all the things. As we're waiting for that, I'll just do a couple of technical updates. So live captioning is being provided. You can click the button at the bottom of your screen where it says the CC button, the captions. There's also in the webinar chat box, there are links that will send you to the streamed player. So you can, if you want, you can see the live transcript as it's being typed. Also, there's a link to the participant folder that has a list of tips or helpful links for our time together today, as well as the program for more information. In terms of the Q&A functions, I see some people are already letting us know that they cannot see the land acknowledgement yet. I'll see if Gabby or Jen can help us with that. There we go. So the Q&A box works. That's fantastic. So you can hit that Q&A button and we'll see it. Yeah, great. I think that those are the technical things. So we offer this land acknowledgement wholeheartedly. We recognize that Berkeley sits on the territory of Huchun, the ancestral and unceded land of the Chochenyo-speaking Ohlone people, the successors of the historic and sovereign Verona Band of Alameda County. This land was and continues to be of great importance to the Muwekma Ohlone tribe and their familial descendants and other familiar descendants of the Verona Band. We recognize that every member of the Berkeley community has benefited and continues to benefit from the use and occupation of this land since the institution's founding in 1868. Consistent with our values of community and diversity, we have a responsibility to acknowledge and make visible the university's relationship to Native peoples. By offering this land acknowledgement, we affirm Indigenous sovereignty, and we will work to hold the University of California, Berkeley more accountable to the needs of American Indian and Indigenous peoples. This acknowledgement was co-created by the Muwekma Ohlone tribe and Native American Student Development and is a living document. Again, we offer this land acknowledgement as an invitation and a reminder to self-reflection and to purposeful action. Acknowledgement is an important part of the learning process of how the afterlives and aftershocks of genocide, slavery, and disenfranchised labor are ever present in our lives. What might it mean to practice purposeful acknowledgement as an enacted interruption of the continued erasure of and harm to Indigenous peoples? How does paying Native land taxes and learning and saying, giving breath to the original names of the people and lands where you work, live, and play, bring to life not only memory, but the right nows and the futures? Thank you again for joining us today. I'm glad to know that the Q&A is working. Before I hand it off to my esteemed colleague and friends, I want to give my deepest gratitude on behalf of the committee to Berkeley Event Services for Zoom hosting us today, and to the Aberdeen captioning team for their support in making this event more accessible. So with that, I will pass it over to Alberto Ledesma and Ella Callow.
Hello, everyone. My name is Alberto Ledesma, he, him, his pronouns. Again, thank you. And thank you, Elisa, for all the work you've been doing and putting this together. We are excited to be having you all joining us over the next several hours as we engage in discussions and dialogues about what becoming an anti-racist campus entails for each of us. And as we begin to recognize strategies and concepts that may lead us to embody these institutional aspirations. We have assembled a series of workshops and panels throughout the day that we think will provide a fairly comprehensive immersion into these questions, into what it means for Berkeley to become an anti-racist campus. This symposium is only a part of the work that the BAAC has been doing since it was established about 2 years ago by Chancellor Carol T. Christ, the Vice Chancellor for Inclusion and Equity, Dania Matos, and People and Culture led by Eugene Whitlock. Since then, a committee of about 20 members from throughout the Berkeley campus has been meeting on a regular basis to do an inventory of various anti-racist projects and initiatives that the campus has been doing for many years now to assess what gaps in anti-racist education are needed to be filled, to bring members of our community together to have discussions about what becoming an anti-racist campus entails, and to develop a draft of an anti-racist campus framework that can act as the foundation of a shared set of principles and goals that can lead us to institutional change. Our work has been inspired by the tireless dedication of so many community members, students, staff, and faculty on this campus who have insisted that we not just talk about equity and inclusion, but that we embody these commitments so that we can see what we want to happen on this campus. So today, we will begin by having a dialogue with key members of our campus community on critical questions regarding our anti-racist aspiration. Ella?
Sorry, had to fumble for the unmute. Thank you so much, Alberto and Elisa. Before we proceed, we want to share a word on our process. The panel discussion is going to consist of a series of 7 questions that we will be asking our panelists, and to which they'll have about 3 minutes per panelist to respond. As a plenary panel, we will not be taking questions via the chat. We do encourage you to keep track of questions that might emerge from this session and to bring them up in the subsequent sessions. There will be plenty of opportunity there to engage with colleagues on the important issues that our panelists will raise in our opening discussion. Today's dialogue is one that our campus has not had as a community. It would be a shame to waste the opportunity to engage with each other. We want to promote that. To that end, we ask that you listen to what the presenters and the panelists are trying to get across. There will likely be moments where you will feel an urgency to interject. Our goal is for us to exchange ideas and understanding so that we have the ability to achieve a common purpose. We do that best when we're generous with our efforts to appreciate one another. Alberto?
Great, so I want to go ahead and introduce our amazing panel. We're going to have 3 members of our community. We had intended to have Vice Chancellor for Inclusion and Equity, Dania Matos. Unfortunately, due to a family emergency, she's not able to join us. We do have, however, Interim Associate Vice Chancellor Elisa Huerta doing an amazing job joining us here today. And so I would like to read Elisa's bio. Elisa Diana Huerta began their time at Berkeley in 2009 and is the founding director of the Multicultural Community Center on campus, a student-run, student-led space. Elisa is a broadly born and Texas-raised organizer, educator, artisan, and scholar. Their scholarship, teaching, and daily approach to their work is grounded in radical women of color feminist praxis, hemispheric indigeneity, radical pedagogy, and community-based research and action. As the director of the MCC and now interim associate vice chancellor for the Centers of Educational Justice and Community Engagement, Elisa is proud to co-create dynamic and engaged holistic resources for students, faculty, staff, and community members. Art making of all kinds makes their heart happy. We also are thrilled to have Professor Jovan Lewis joining us. Professor Lewis is an associate professor and chair of geography at the University of California, Berkeley. and a governor appointee to the California State Reparations Task Force. He is the author of Scammer's Yard, The Crime of Black Repair in Jamaica, and Violent Utopia, Dispossession and Black Restoration in Tulsa. Jovan studies racial capitalism, underdevelopment, and reparations as means of understanding the historical constitution of Black communities. We also are lucky to have Dean of Students, Sunny Lee, joining us. Dean Lee has worked in student affairs for over 25 years and is currently the Associate Vice Chancellor and Dean of Students at UC Berkeley. Previously, she served as Callow's Associate Dean of Students and Assistant Ombudsperson for Students. Previously to Berkeley, Sunny was Director of Student Life and Cultural Centers at Cal Poly Pomona and Assistant Directors of UC Irvine's Cross-Cultural Center and Pomona College's Asian American Resource Center. She has also sailed with the Semester at Sea Study Abroad program on 3 voyages in various roles. Sunny earned her PhD in Higher Education Administration from Claremont Graduate University, in College Student Personnel from the University of Maryland, and her BA in Criminology and Law at the University of California, Irvine. Sunny is the co-editor of the Josie Bass monograph titled Working with Asian American College Students, and has published various articles and book chapters on student development and racial identity. Sunny immigrated from South Korea, where she was 6 years old and grew up in the Inland Empire of Southern California. She now calls the East Bay her home, where she is proudly raising 2 children.
Thank you, Alberto. So welcome to our panelists, our esteemed panelists. To begin, we would ask that each of you just tell us a little about yourself beyond what goes in a formal bio, how you are arriving at this work today. And we'll begin with Jovan and then move to Elisa and Sunny.
Sure, thank you. Hello, Alberto, Elisa, Ella, thank you for having me today. And thank you for, moving forward this really important initiative that hopefully goes beyond the stage of initiative and becomes really part, of the kind of governing practice and principles of our campus. And there's certainly a really good foundation that would indicate that that is very likely. So yes, a little bit about myself, everything you need to know is in the bio. Just kidding. I came to Berkeley in 2015. I am, of Jamaican background, and for me, the issues that I work on, have been really part of a kind of upbringing for me. As a teenager, I grew up in Miami, and you could see economic and racial inequality and disparities, in the community there. So for me, this has really been a lifelong, concern and a lifelong commitment that, I had a really good fortune of being able to, go and study and to get a job, trying to, both understand and advocate around. And so, for me, alongside my work as a researcher and as a teacher, I have for the past nearly 2 years been able to think, about policy, as a member of the California Reparations Task Force. And, so there, I think what we're doing is really much what you all are trying to do with this initiative, right? Trying to think about the histories of discrimination, the histories of inequality that produce a place like the University of California, Berkeley. And, with a continuing commitment, to UC Berkeley, just as, in the task force, we have a continuing commitment to the state of California, wanting to improve it by first doing the very hard work of recognizing and then reconciling and then remedying, those historical harms. And so for me, what brings me to this work is that I kind of feel like I've always been a part of this work in different ways. It has been personal and it is now professional. And hopefully the combination of the two will make me, a kind of impactful agent, not just for change, but for actual improvement.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Sunny.
Thank you so much. Again, my gratitude to Alberto, Ella, Elisa, and the entire BAC committee, and Jovan and Lisa. It's so wonderful to share this space this morning with you. So what's beyond the bio, and how do I come to this work? I come from parents who were born in North Korea, and heard stories about their escape, heard stories about my family's lives in Korea during the Japanese occupation. And those stories shaped me in ways, and I think unconscious ways, that bring me to this work. When we immigrated, we landed in a small town in the Inland Empire. I didn't know any English, and there were no other Asian Americans like me except for my aunt and her family who sponsored us, and faced a lot of overt racism. That was back in 1980, so this was the 80s. And so chose to go to college nearby in Orange County, about an hour away. And that was 1992. And in April of 1992, April 29th exactly, that was when Rodney King was beaten in LA. And I watched all of that unfold as a high school senior, and watched Korean business owners standing on top of their stores trying to protect their businesses, because there wasn't any security or law enforcement supporting any of the communities. They were just stand by and watching, and I saw stores burning and folks dying, and I was so confused. I remember my dad leaving the house. He ran a dry cleaners in Riverside, an hour away from LA, but he ran out because he was afraid that his store, even though it wasn't really anywhere near the vicinity, he was afraid that his shop was going to be targeted by being Asian or Korean owned. And it was incredibly confusing as a college-bound student. And when I went to Irvine, decided that I was going to major in criminology, thought I was going to go to law school because as an immigrant, I didn't understand the various career options. And actually through my electives, by taking ethnic studies, Asian American studies, the few that were available at that time in the 90s, women's studies, it helped me make sense of the confusion and what had happened in LA in 92. And how Korean Americans were pitted against Blacks in LA, when this had nothing to do with those relations, or in my mind, I thought it didn't. And so it was during that time that I decided to switch gears. I knew that I wanted to make an impact on my community, go into some sort of public service. And so, that it's been a long journey since. And I entered student affairs wanting specifically to work in multicultural affairs, what we called at the time. Equity and inclusion work is what we call it now. And I thought that is where I'm going to spend the rest of my career. Things happen. And we're going to get into this later about the differentiation between DIBJ and anti-racist work. But I realized that we actually need equity-minded folks and approaches in all aspects of our institutions and systems. We need folks to buy into this at all the levels to change our policies and systems and the way that we do things. And so it's amazing to me that that on a Wednesday morning on the volunteer time that we have hundreds of people joining us for this really important conversation.
Thank you, Sunny. Thank you for that sharing. And Elisa.
Yeah, hello again. It is really great to be in this circle of folks, and the broader circle that I'm imagining of the 316 of us that are gathered today. I do want to offer again the good wishes from our Vice Chancellor Dania Matos. She is with us in spirit and is taking care of her abuelita right now. So I also asked to send her and abuelita lots of good energy this morning. I also want to say happy first day of Black History Month. I know that this is a hard time. I feel like it's always a hard time. There's a lot of things happening, but also want to celebrate and uplift the work of all the folks on campus that and all of the different iterations of opportunities to celebrate and engage this month that are coming up. And so for folks on campus, you'll see that Black History Month message coming out later today. In terms of how I arrived here, you know, it's always circuitous and we can make sense of it looking back. It feels by chance that I'm here. I think what brought me to the work of thinking about of working in it and being committed to anti-racist work, my childhood growing up along the US-Mexico border, along I-10, along I-8, if you all are familiar with those things, with those places. I experienced a lot of policing around, especially around Border Patrol, experiences with checkpoints at a very early age, a constant reminder. That coupled with my own recognition that my experience growing up versus my cousins growing up in other places. So geography really influenced the different opportunities that we had, the kind of spaciousness I had to be a little nerd poet in the world. And I was able to have that space where my loved ones did not have that same kind, they had different kinds of pressures on them for different, and it, you know, now I understand for structural reasons, as well as, I think what also is the influence of radical women of color, especially radical women, queer women of color, that helped me understand who I am in the world as a queer and non-binary person of color, not fitting in. And I think that's actually very indicative of how I approach is in a complex and ideally holistic way. Like, how do I understand myself in the world? At the end of that is critical inquiry, critical curiosity, and a attention to structure. And seeing how that influences. And that brings me into this work of holding space that is holistic space in many ways, like the Multicultural Community Center, and now the work that I'm doing. So I'm really happy to be joining today.
Thank you, Elisa. And I just want to recognize what an absolute embarrassment of riches that we have just with the three of you here. You know, you could have been anywhere, and we're lucky that you're here and that you're with us. So thank you for that. Alberto.
Yeah, so now we'll get into our kind of some of the more the questions that are a little bit more textured, and I think, Sunny, you alluded to this a little bit. I mean, there's a lot going on across our country, and thank you for historicizing kind of the perspective. I think all of you spoke a little bit about the intersectional uniqueness that we bring to this dialogue, and how important it is for us to honor that uniqueness in having this conversation, because it is important that when we talk about anti-racism and the truth of our experience, that truth is relative to the history of our experience. Sunny, you made some reference to this. What do you all see? And here, what I want to do is begin with you, Sunny, then move to Elisa, and then Jovan. What do you see as the difference between diversity, equity, and inclusion and anti-racism work on this campus? And why might this be a good time for Berkeley to be pursuing becoming an anti-racist campus as an institutional goal, given what's happening both on this campus, in this state, and in this country?
Thank you. Easy question for a Wednesday morning, right? So the way that I see it is DIBJ, it's often where our conversations around this topic stays, right? And so representation is part of the DIBJ framework, numerical demographic diversity, and that's absolutely necessary. We need representation, but I see it as the floor. It is the bare minimum. It is a starting point. It's the beginning of a conversation, absolutely not the end. And sometimes I think we pride ourselves by saying, oh, we have, we've reached parity, et cetera, which, we're not there in any of it regardless, we haven't even met the bare minimum on this campus, right? When we look at our undergraduate, graduate student population representation, even when you look at who is leading this institution, I think Asian Americans make about 40%, the umbrella of undergraduates, but only about 10% of upper managerial positions. So there's discrepancies like that all over. And I see that example under the DIBJ umbrella. How I see anti-racism, however, is it goes much deeper than that. We're questioning institutional racism and oppression. We're questioning everything, all of our policies, the way that we practice our work, and beginning with the assumption that nothing is neutral. And I say that as a former ombudsperson, where we say there's neutrality and impartiality, and we'd always be the first to say we aspire for that, whatever that means, but we have to question, there's always biases that we bring to this work. And so how this university was created, the history of it, it's beginning with the conversation that it was meant to exclude large groups of people. And over time, that has been challenged. So we are here today. So that somebody who looks like me with my background, who wasn't even born in this country, can be in this role. And actually my parents remind me of that. They're like, you know, you couldn't even be the dean of students in Korea because of class status, right? And the fact that you can be in your role at Berkeley is quite amazing. So I say that, but I don't like being the exception, which I am. I'm the exception on this campus and in other institutions, and that's not okay. And so, you know, some examples, I think, you know, one simple example that I see as actually part of contributing to this is, you know, in recent years, you know, People and Culture instituted this new policy or protocol. You give job interview candidates the interview questions 15 minutes in advance or some, you know, so that we can have it visually, right? And that seems race neutral. It seems just like a good thing to do. But when you examine it is, when we're looking at the interview structure and who we recruit, and we talk about, oh, the pipeline is just not good enough. Well, there are reasons, you know, why that is, right? Who applies, who sees themselves at a place like Berkeley, you know, the reputation is quite intimidating. And what we're doing is when we approach and change the way that we do things from an anti-racist framework, it's actually good for everybody. It's not just good for underrepresented minority groups. It serves all of us. And it's recognizing that, you know, we're all connected and we're lifting all of us up. So, you know, in terms of DIBJ, when you look at the racial demographics of California, you know, we're not there. We're not there in terms of representing the entire United States, but events like this today, raising our awareness, our knowledge, engaging in conversations, that's beginning that work, right? Standardized testing is another example. We're now test-free, and COVID really helped propel that. That's another example of anti-racism, changing our policies so that we can start looking at our applicant pool in much more broad ways. And I still hear conversations and spaces of folks being, you know, some faculty being concerned that our students are less qualified. So it's still that do you give up excellence or quality or competency when you prioritize diversity and representation? No, absolutely not. Why do we even pose it that way as a juxtaposition? Increased representation, diversity increases our excellence. That is a measure and variable of quality and excellence. So let's reframe. I will stop there because I could keep going and I want to share the space.
Elisa?
Yeah, thank you for that, Sunny. I think so much of it really resonates, and it is really that critical inquiry if for me, thinking of the difference between DEI or DEIBJ and anti-racism it's also the way you enact it. If you're doing DEIBJ work from an anti-racist value, and that's part of it, then okay, we name things, it moves, there's jargony moments. It's really what are your core values? And what one of the things that I think is that, or my experience has been that DEIBJ is a little bit more amenable to co-optation or to softening in some ways. I appreciate the term anti-racism, the work of anti-racism, because it's enacted, it's an action, it's sharper. I feel like it resists co-optation, even though people, everyone's going to do whatever they're going to do and call it anti-racism, but it doesn't necessarily have that critical inquiry to it. I also find that many DEI efforts are around management of diversity, and I'll just say that for me that I'm not interested in managing that. Like, I'm interested in what is, I want to know the complex stories. I want to know all those things, those lived experiences. It makes it richer. I think about my multiple identities just allow for just a larger landscape to see things. And I think that is valuable in the world versus, having more myopic approaches to the world. I think that question, like nothing is neutral. My PhD is in anthropology. So, we have to reckon with that, right? We have to reckon with the horrible colonial history and violence that is very much rooted on this campus. And so the interventions of questioning objectivity is really vital. And I think that it is really in that naming, because as we talk about anti-racism, I have heard more conversations around white supremacy, just naming the things. And there was a fear of saying that by many people. And so now I'm like, when you're saying white supremacy, let's really talk about what you mean now. It's not just a talking point. And I think an example of this is in a conversation that I was having recently with colleagues was a question of, is Berkeley a predominantly white institution, a PWI? Well, as Sunny said, technically it's not. So our diversity numbers are not technically, but we are absolutely a historically white institution. We're absolutely rooted in that experience. So how do we name the thing? And for me, that's also coming more from a anti-racist perspective of getting at the root of the systems. I'll also say, again, as a queer non-binary person of color, as the conversation, what I see opening up in the conversations of anti-racism is, again, let's name the thing. So my beloved colleague many of our beloved colleagues, Huang, who's the director of LGBTQ plus advancement and advocacy here on campus, reminded us that when we use the term homophobia, for instance, that's like a fear of queer folks, right? But is it actually that, or are we actually talking about cis heteropatriarchy? Let's talk about the system, because are people actually afraid of that? Is it like arachnophobia, to use an example, right? Or is it actually the system enacting itself to talk about how power is there? So for me, like that's the clarity and incisiveness that anti-racism has offered as a practitioner in this area. And I'll pass it over to Jovan.
To follow both of those fantastic answers is a challenge. So thank you for the challenge. So I think, this question is in many ways like the question, right? Because, when we think about, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and forgive the alliteration, but we're talking about questions around composition, right? Meaning who's there, the conditions, under which those who are there are living, are working, are studying, right? And, a kind of principle of collectivism, right? So how are we forming the kind of collective that is here, or a sense of belonging, between all of the constituents, that are there? Now, anti-racism, is asking, the question, right? Well, what are the terms by which we understand each of those things, right? What are the terms, around which we construct our notions of the collective, right? And I think this is exactly what Elisa is getting at, right? And I think this is what Sonia was getting at as well. Just the idea of, well, there's a later question that you ask, but like when we think about the public, when we think about community, right? These are, and to kind of jump in the anthropological, on the anthropological bandwagon, we have to understand, how do we operationalize, things like community? How do we operationalize what the threshold is for diversity, right? And sometimes we do fall back on the kind of actuarial, the accounting, well, we have X number of these kinds of people here, and so therefore we're fine. But, have those people, been given the power to actually shape the terms around which the university sees itself, right? Has there then been, again, this actual collective project by which these, these various groups aren't, simply being allowed to be included, right? But are given the power to influence, the actual terms around which they take part in reproducing, the university, because this is the kind of phenomenon in question right now. I mean, and that's where the anti-racism thing comes in, right? Because we do have to understand that right now, we know that the word racism, we know that the practice of racism is a bad thing, and we've known it for some time, but for a much longer time, we didn't know it, right? When you think about, 1868, as being a particular, juncture around which, well, what were the values that were literally foundational, to the university? We have to be willing to, call the thing, and this is really what Elisa's saying, right? And so anti-racism is the move that says, yes, we can value diversity, right? But are we willing to ask the hard question around how do we actually define diversity? We can talk about inclusion, but we want to understand the power dynamics around who is including and who is being included, right? And that's something that is really difficult to ask. And unfortunately, when you're dealing with the question of racism, the term has, as a product of civil rights, become so taboo, right? That it's also difficult to talk about it when it shows up in ways that are, of course, still there, right? Because again, the thing is foundational, right? And it was foundational in a way where it wasn't seen as aberrant, right? Certainly not abhorrent. It was just the way that the world worked. And so we, when we're talking about anti-racism, we actually are talking about a process and project of world remaking. It is that thing. And I think, what we have to recognize is, for the campus, because I think you're asking the question about, how are these things happening on campus? It's really easy to do, I think, the DEI thing, right? Because no one really is saying, I don't want different kinds of people here. But the harder question is, well, do I want different kinds of people here? Do I want to provide different kinds of programming for different kinds of people here on terms that I am personally not comfortable with, or that person don't reflect my preferences and worldviews? And that's the harder work of anti-racism. And so therefore, it's actually harder to find, that work at play in the university.
That was incredible. Thank you, all three of you. I wish that could just be streaming over live speakers, like in every street in the US right now. That was a wonderful exchange. The next question, actually, all of you kind of went there in your thorough, robust responses to the question Alberto just posed, which was, why is anti-racism work critical for a campus like ours? But if you'd like to touch on that more specifically, that'd be wonderful, and provide any examples you'd like to hold up of the work, the anti-racist work on this campus that has stood out for you. And I think, I don't remember what the order was last time. Let's start with Elisa and then go to Sunny and Jovan. Or no, Jovan went last. Let's do Elisa, Jovan, Sunny.
I mean, I can provide, as Jovan said, it's been time. It's past time. It's, and I think particularly for UC Berkeley, and I say this a lot, and I'm happy to say this in this forum, is that our reputation gets ahead of us and actually cuts off the ability to do this work often, because people are like, oh, Berkeley already has it. We already do that. And, you don't get to be the #1 public university in this educational system without having a deep commitment to principles of white supremacy in that founding, right? Even though we want to, you know, to name the thing. I'm not afraid of saying that because that actually helps clarify then the work that we need to do. It actually feels like it makes it very simple, where I know that that's also hitting on the fear, that fear nerve for folks. And then the question is, well, who gets protected when they're scared and who doesn't? Whose comfort is protected and whose isn't? I think particularly for UC Berkeley, because of the UC systems and as the, you know, first university in the system, this university, we have had a really significant part to play in the genocide of Native communities in California. Right? When we think about what's happening, the work that happened in the name of anthropology, in the name of science, housed here, those hauntings are present for many folks on campus now. This is not a thing of the past. And when we even think about how, you know, it wasn't that long ago. And when we really look at the times, it's for some folks, if they're long-lived, 2 generations, 3 generations, right? But those it's this time of reckoning it and opening up. I think we can see that with everything happening in the world, even the shift to moving to naming buildings. Before there was that, I mean, that's like kind of folklore that I have received because I wasn't here on campus, is folks have been trying to unname what is now the social science building for a very long time. But there's a new opportunity with the ruptures that are happening. And all of a sudden there's a process to do that. And all of a sudden, all the barriers that were there, what are we gonna do? What's it gonna be called? All those things that stop the conversation where, well, we're just gonna unname it and to be determined. It has another name, and all of a sudden it's possible. So I think that this is the time, because we are the tectonic plates, not to say anything about, because we are on the fault, but they're moving, and there's possibility now when there has been so much stagnation or obfuscation in the work. And that's what gets me, obviously, that's what gets me going and excited and helps me stay engaged in the work.
Thank you. Jovan.
Yeah, so I mean, exactly that. And I remember I got here in 2015, and I remember serving with Vice Chancellor for Equity and Inclusion, Naila Nasir, on that early task force on naming. And, you know, it was like, oh, we have to ask the Attorney General, you know what I mean, to unname X building because it was tied to an endowment. And then, you know, and that is a perfect example of what we've been talking about. Like, so what really matters, you know what I mean? And what are we valuing? Are we valuing the relationship to a donor, or, you know, and that might actually be an ancestral relationship to a donor, or the experience of the students who we are actively trying to serve, and the conditions under which they are here to study and to learn, and to be in relationship with us. So I'm really glad that has changed. And I've had students who've come to me about, you know, renaming the building that I'm in, and I'm like, yeah, here's the link, you know what I mean? And just to be able to kind of do that, and it's a process, of course, but, you know, they're like, oh, wait, there's a link and I can start the process. Yeah, there's a link, you can start the process, right? You know, so I think, you know, even that is a wonderful example. You know, I want to say that it's critical that we do this because, and you know, Elisa was getting to this earlier about this kind of co-optation of like political language and what have you, you know, and you know, that process of actually, you know, taking out some of the potential and power of some of that language, because, you know, we certainly are, you know, in a moment of kind of updated, even kind of improved circumstances, right, where we're very happy to recognize each other and kind of promote these kind of values of community. But we have to recognize that I think some of the operations, you know, and this is what we were getting at earlier, have not been updated, have not been improved. You know, Sonia earlier was talking about these issues of excellence and so forth, and those kinds of values that have not been updated, you know, these principles really, you know, by which you make decisions and like determine qualifications. And, you know, so that means if we fail at getting at the root of those things, what we have at best is a false sense of progress. But that false sense of progress doesn't actually yield a material progress. But the problem is that we've then expended the energies, right? We've expended the goodwill, you know, in you know, facilitating this false sense of progress, right? What we can think of as the discursive, you know, progress. And doing that, makes the actual work even more impossible, right? Because, people could say, well, we've already attempted, but look at our numbers. And we don't actually have, the real sense of transformation that can actually be something that gets at this world remaking that I talked about earlier. A couple of examples, though, in addition to, I think this wonderful example of the building renaming process, I have been, very encouraged by the kind of diversity grants that GradDiv made available a couple of years ago. I think the principle behind this, behind those grants was simply, inform us how to do this thing better. And here's some funding to do it, right? Go and build the partnerships, go and build, the basis of collaborations with graduate students in particular, and let's rebuild this, from the ground up in a way. And I know different departments, got money, and we'll see what the the actual outcome is for from these different initiatives, or the series of initiatives that these different departments I think are trying to spin up. And of course, if those initiatives end up on what I call the central ledger of a department. You know what I mean? Like, it's nice to have money for 4 years to do something, but then you have to, follow that up with a commitment to continue to enact it as a core principle. But I think that's very much, a part of what it takes, is to say, tell us what it takes. I think, so I'm giving very personal, experiences based upon my specific network. I recently, or a year ago, this is my second year as chair of my department. And I remember, when I had the meeting with my dean about trying to take on this wonderful job of being chair, I had a really honest conversation. I said, well, what is this about? You know what I mean? Like, why should I do this? And my Dean Ray was like, listen, I want our division to be different. I want it to be better. And I know that, it takes having the right people in the job, to do it. And so something as simple as that, which again, within the confines of a kind of administrative process, but still it's like, well, let me be very thoughtful. Her position was, let me be very thoughtful about who I asked to be chair, because I'm certainly not the most senior person in my department, right? But I think the principle in the past has been, let's make the most senior person, right, chair of the department. But is that what we actually want? Given the kind of histories that we're talking about, not to disparage senior faculty on campus, but to say that, well, let's actually look for people who, represent the principles that I want to see instituted, in a department, in a division. And then lastly, I'll just talk about what we're doing in geography. So because I became chair, and because the dean gave me this mandate to do things differently, that's exactly what I decided to do. And so I saw that we had, in geography, we had generally we had a curriculum that was interesting to students, right? We study and we teach about really, I think, interesting and important things, but the structure was completely, inoperable for the communities that I wanted to serve. And, I was a transfer student, and I understood, the hustle and the struggle of being a transfer student. And what I saw was that transfer students were struggling in our program. They couldn't take it up, and so, the first semester, I spoke to my faculty and said, we're going to redo the curriculum, and we're going to have the transfer student as the figure around which we structure our curriculum. And I think we did that. And what that means is that a student can come in, and you can, as a transfer student, if you want to fulfill all of the requirements in a year, you can do it. Because I've also said to my course scheduler and my faculty, listen, we have to have, right, classes available at times that do not conflict, so that a student could come in and say, I'm going to do 4 classes in the fall, 4 classes in the spring, and I'm going to satisfy my basic requirements for this major. And so these are 3 examples at really 3 different kind of levels, of the university, where it's just simply about saying, well, what are the principles, right? Leading with the principles first, right? With a a recommitment to a different set of principles, and then using, you know, kind of administrative capability and resources to enact them. And I think that's basically what it takes. And so it is absolutely happening. And I know Lisa and Sunny have other examples of you know, it at work on campus.
Thank you for that, Jovan. Sunny, do you want to finish up this section for us? And then I think, Alberto, we've had such amazing responses. I think you're going to need to move toward our closing comments. So Sunny.
Just Jovan, I just really appreciate what you shared of the example with centering your curriculum around the transfer student versus who we consider to be the normative traditional student on campus. And it reminds me of early in my career, I would be sent to, and I would sign up for these leadership trainings. And it was such a deficit model because it was really teaching me how to be a white man, a white cis hetero man, right? And I thought, gosh, well, why can't I just bring who I am and my own cultural wealth and be an authentic leader versus performing? Because that's not going to work for me. And you know, so I've specifically chosen spaces where I feel, and that's mostly public institutions, and why I believe in the public mission, because I feel like we can have different conversations. It's a different starting point. And I definitely felt that when I came to Berkeley, that we could have the conversation at a further point. But I also found that there were barriers here because it is a value that we do talk about. And so when we receive constructive feedback about how we're showing up in a space, and it's around, you know, race and identity, there's an immediate defensiveness that can show up in this space, a fragility under the umbrella of supremacy, because we equate being completely knowledgeable and woke and all of that with morality, that we're a good person. So if you give me feedback of I'm using the wrong pronouns, or I'm using, or I didn't, you know, you're questioning my perspective, then you're calling me a bad person. And that's not it at all. And I use this example a lot. We know it, you know, in technology, we have different skill sets, and we even make fun of ourselves depending on our age and technology or our generation. But we don't, I don't know how to use the latest apps that my 14-year-old knows how to use. What is Discord? I don't consider myself a bad person. I just know that I need to study up on it, right? And so similar to the concepts of anti-racism, DIBJ, you know, why do we get so defensive? It's because we have to acknowledge the more that we know, the less that we know. And so, you know, it's simply not enough to bring in diversity. It's not enough to bring in folks of color. We have to be ready for it. We have to change the environment. We have to change our policies around it, because when they come in, are we supporting their experience? We have to shift the power dynamics, as my co-panelists have talked about. And nobody gives up power easily. Nobody wants to share power easily, right? That place of privilege. And you know, we are in a place of privilege. We all work at Berkeley. And so with that comes tremendous responsibility, and we need to be accountable and live true to our public mission, and serving and developing the future leaders of California, the country, and the world, because that is part of our mission here, right? It's not just to produce brilliant scholars, but it's brilliant scholars and preparing future leaders who are going to disrupt the violence that's happening in our country. And that's really, to me, the cost of not doing this work is violence, people dying, and so I think we have all a personal and institutional decision to make. Are we going to be players in maintaining the status quo? Are we going to be active disruptors?
Beautifully said. Thank you so much. Alberto.
Yeah, I think we're hoping to get a couple more questions before we kind of sum it up. This has been a really rich conversation, and Sunny, you know, you hit right on this. You know, I as a staff member now who used to be, you know, I came to Berkeley as an undocumented student a long time ago, and you know, was able to, you know, get my first bachelor's, and then, you know, I got a PhD, and you know, was able to, you know, do good work where, was able to do well because of the support I received at Berkeley. But for me, it was important to still go back to my community and try to give back and in the spirit of social justice, to take that success that Berkeley enabled and share it. I work with a group of students in the Mellon Mason Graduate Fellowship Program, and that same spirit is there. It is a spirit that the Mellon Foundation really promotes, kind of social justice as a core component of that process, where kind of giving back, especially if you have had difficulty in your experience, that going and giving back is really critical. How central should an ethical commitment towards anti-racism for university students, for all university students, be today? Maybe if we can get like a really short answer from all of you, and we can begin, Sunny, with you, and then Elisa, and then Jovan. Just, because that's, I think that's a key question that sometimes comes up. So, Sunny.
Very simply, we have these principles of community that are aspirational. And when is it not? When will we get to the point where they're no longer aspirational? Where we can say it is the state. And I think, this is the choir who showed up to this symposium, right? You all believe that this is important. And so, but we have, we're a community of 45,000 plus students, and then, much more beyond that. And so we are at the cutting edge. I feel so privileged and fortunate to be here and to engage in this work I at a different place. And like any family, we got to work it out. There's conflict. We're not going to agree with each other. And we got to be the grownups in the room, right? We got to know how to take that feedback, integrate it, check our ego. We have so much brilliance here, but I think with brilliance and talent comes ego and sometimes a little bit of narcissism. So let's check that. And let's remember that we're all humans connected, and we're all uplifting the totality of our lives. And we're here because we're choosing to make a difference in generations of families to come. I would not have been able to be here without the Pell Grant and so much support. Nobody gets here and does this alone, and we shouldn't either.
I think I'm jumping in here. I think if the question is how important is it, it's vital. It's critical. There's not one class, decal, conversation, advising session that should not be rooted in the principles of anti-racism on this campus. And when we're really thinking about it as critical inquiry, right? And I think we have to also resist, again, to name it what it is, right? So I think people, as an example of ethnic studies, people, it's studying people of color. No, ethnic studies is the study of what you learn is critical inquiry and critical consciousness, a way to understand. It's more of an approach versus the what, right? So it's also what I'm hearing Jovan say is the principles, right? We need to ask what the principles are. That is, everybody needs that, from in your chemistry lab to your rhetoric course, like those it's vital, because we need to have that interruption, and it has to be a clear and insistent interruption, because the educational system in this country is full of erasure, right? So I think if folks are coming through here, and I'm of the point, if folks want to be engage leaders, do all those things, but also if somebody doesn't want to, that's fine. You should have the opportunity to go take your path through this place as you want, right? And I think those are part of the things, because going back to this question of who we're imagining, that is directly connected to material resource, right? And so I think those are the kinds of processes that need to be illuminated always, that and they're the assumptions. They're the assumptions of quote unquote objectivity. So I mean, it's vital, not just for students, but at all levels, for us to have that curiosity, and that it's not about what Sunny was saying about a link to morality. I mean, we have our feelings. That's great. Like, have your feelings, absolutely. And also, that's some people get to deny other things based on their feelings, and other people don't because of their positionality. So, yeah, it's a vital and thing that everybody needs to be doing at all corners of the university.
So, I mean, there really isn't much to add to both of these responses, but what I will add is that, I wanna just shift, I wanna go a bit further than Sunny and Lisa, and just shift the responsibility away from students, and to every department, every unit on campus, right? The campus itself, it's our job to educate these students. It's our job to produce and reproduce society. And there are a variety of principles that we espouse every day as driving, that process. And so, in other words, if we are anti-racist, the students, that we train and that we educate, will have that as part, of their formation and part of the very architecture of their worldview, right? And so the question is, if it's how central should it be to to university students? The question is, how central should it be to every department manager, every department chair, right, every advisor, every dean, right? I mean, that's the question that we really have to ask, and this is the question that I understand this initiative is actually asking, and hopefully will succeed in getting answered, because students are attracted to universities because of those universities' values, right? In principle, or whatever kinds of other, points of attraction there might be. It's our job to say, when you come to University of California, Berkeley, this is what your education is driven by. We see that, in Florida, my home state, don't be mad at me. We see a campaign against that very thing. And it's very real and it's very threatening, to say, actually, we want, incorporation, actually, we want representation, actually, we want our institutions to be representative of, a very wide, selection of people and the ways of understanding the world. And so for us, the students will have it as a central ethical concern if we have it as a central ethical concern. And I think the campaign right here, right now, is to make that the case.
Thank you, everyone. Alberto, do you feel like we have time to move into another question still? Or are you ready?
I think this is the time to wrap it up with our audience question.
Okay, we would be selfish and keep you here for another hour, but we recognize that the rest of the symposium proceeds and that your time is valuable. Yeah, so I'll hand it to Alberto to close us up.
So having heard our presenters' responses to question 2, which we thought was just amazing, we did want to turn the tables to everyone in the audience and ask you all to think about how do you differentiate the kinds of work that happens on this campus, DEI/BJ work versus anti-racist work yourselves. Where do you see the theory versus the praxis, right? How is it that the work, when the work happens, folks who, let's say, talk about doing anti-racist or DEI/BJ work versus folks who actually do it? We just wanted to ask you to reflect on that. And after that, we wanted to thank Sunny, to thank Jovan, to thank Elisa for the wonderful responses that they have given to our questions. We know that we asked you really convoluted questions that were difficult to really digest, but you gave amazing responses that have really helped us think through the really large question that we're asking about what it means for Berkeley to become an anti-racist institution. This is a very large question, given Berkeley's role as the premier R1, public R1 in the country, if not the world. You know, for us to have this aspiration is really something. And so thank you for the responses that you've given us. We really appreciate it. And what we want to ask all of you who've attended today, you will see that in your participant materials, there is going to be an evaluation tool that you will have. And I don't know, Elisa, if you have any additional instructions relative to that.
No, thank you for facilitating us, Alberto and Ella. Thank you, Sunny and Jovan, for inviting me in last minute. I was like, oh, this is a great Wednesday morning. Let's do this all the time. Gabby and Jen have dropped the links all in the chat. They're all also in your the participant folder. If you're having any trouble there, you received an email this morning about how to re-register for things. Feel free to reach out for us with any questions. We would love to hear your feedback and comments on all of this. Again, the work that we're doing is ongoing as it needs to be and reflective. So the more crowdsourcing we have, the more conversation, the stronger the work that we're able to do. So I think that's it. Thank you all for joining us. Concurrent sessions will begin at 10:20 and we'll run through 11:50. There's about a 10-minute break, and then we will have our closing plenary session. Your link that got you here will get you to the closing plenary, and then the other links to the concurrent sessions are like I said, in multiple places. If you have any trouble, please reach out to the numbers in the tip sheet, and we'll get you where you need to go. Thank you so much, everyone.
Take care. Thank you, everyone.
Wonderful day.